I made a bunch of games the last well, at least I started them. Okay, yeah, I cancelled all of them. But why is that? Let me use my last game series as an example. I documented the development of the game with devlogs on YouTube to ensure I stayed motivated. And that worked pretty well, at least at the beginning when everything was still fresh and exciting. The problem, however, was that I wanted too much. New systems, new ideas, the scope was way too big. I mean, come on, who needs arrow shooting in that game? On top of that, there was no clear concept. I loved drawing inspiration from games I enjoy playing myself, usually in the genres like survival, RPG, building games, and I often take elements and mechanics from those games and try to implement them into my own projects. But somehow, every game I make ends up being a cross between Minecraft and Zelda, and that needs to change. I already have an idea, a much smaller scope. My goal now is to start over with a game that has an incredibly minimal scope. The game should feel complete and coherent even with this small scope so that the concept is clear. Once the concept works on a small scale, I can gradually add new mechanics. So I've created yet another Unity project and thrown a few things to start prototyping. I found the idea of having some kind of planet where things could happen quite intriguing. So I grabbed a sphere and wrote a small script to make sure blocks could be placed correctly on the surface of this little planet. But since I absolutely can't model, I just used the cube as a planet and decided to stick with the voxel style. And boom, Minecraft. Okay, it's not quite there yet. As you can see, the cube planet has 6 sides. Each side, if we use Minecraft terms, is a biome. I started with the default side, the grassland. So I created a few grass blocks, trees and rocks using Magica Voxel and then generated them on the grassland surface using Perlin noise. So far it doesn't look too bad. Sure, it's still very empty, but for a starting point and as we just learned for a small scope, it's perfect. Next I made an astronaut with Magica Voxel, dropped him onto my planet and after he immediately won the ugliest character competition, I replaced him with a new astronaut that I liked much better. I also created a level selection dialog and then wrote my own A-star pathfinding algorithm so that my little astronaut can now wander around the planet's surface. But first things first, the boring stuff. In the last couple of days I spent most of the time rewriting the code base so the further development is easier, more convenient and not that much of mom's spaghetti code. This helps me to create new content much quicker like items and resources. Also I fixed the bugs that occurred, for example that the tile hovering effect was enabled on all 6 sides of the cube or weird walking behavior that the character used the current tile position for A-star pathfinding instead of its real position, which led to the case that the character walked first back to the current tile position and then continued the correct path. Alright, enough of the boring stuff. Now it's time for the real fun. Lasers! I created a laser using a shader graph and gave it a cool look and then sent my astronaut to the World Destruction Tour. Okay, to be honest, this really does not look good. But I think it's okay, because we have a super minimal scope, we just want to implement some base functionalities, and to be honest, for this purpose it's totally fine. Yeah, and as you can see, with this laser you can gather resources. I also built a little UI that shows you which resource you gathered right here. So it pops up over the astronaut and then fades away after half a second. I also modeled a really ugly laser model with Magica Voxel, just that the astronaut has anything in its hand and it can be visualized quite well. The laser is there to gather resources, but of course in the future there will be some resources that this red laser cannot gather. So there will be some kind of upgrade system for the laser, so for example the green laser can gather some more rare minerals. But for now it's okay to use the default laser. So the next steps are that we have to implement some kind of inventory that we can use for our building system. I worked on quite a few things last week, one of them being the super cool zoom effect when entering a world site. The tricky part was transitioning from a perspective camera to an orthographic one. I kind of faked it by using a perspective camera with an insanely low field of view, like 5 or 6, while positioning it really far away from the target. I think it already looks super cool, but I still need to redefine it so it doesn't feel so static at the end. Maybe with some twinning or something like that. And then I accidentally destroyed my entire world. But for a good reason. I reworked the world generation, so I can add liquids to it, like for example water to the grassland or lava to the hell side of the world or something like that. To achieve this, I first used Perlin noise again to create a tile map. But I used cubes. So for a grid size of 50, I have now 2 2500 game objects. And that's perfectly performant. But then I remembered that I'm a useless piece of shit that cancels all of his projects. But one project got an algorithm that can combine all these game objects. So I copied the mesh combiner I made some years ago and adjusted it so that it worked perfectly with my current project. And it really did. But how exactly does it really work? Simply spoken, I create a parent game object for all same blocks. For example, all liquid blocks are under a parent game object and all solid blocks, like the ground, are under a parent game object. Then all children from each parent are getting analyzed so that their vertices borders are being recalculated and transformed into a single mesh. Ta-da! And now instead of 2500 game objects, I just have two, one for the solid blocks and one for the liquids. I then simply added these new world sites to the current world and it worked like a charm. Well, okay, it didn't work out that good, but I kinda managed to fix it. It doesn't look perfect right now, but I think it's still a big win. I fixed the display bug on the planet. This issue came up in the first place because I'm procedurally generating the world, but I fixed it simply by adjusting the precision of each world site by 0.5 on the x-axis. I can't believe it. Then a viewer left a really great tip under my last video. Just change the perspective. And seriously, switching the camera to orthographic completely unified the art style. No more weird visual inconsistencies like before. Honestly, I have no idea why I didn't do this sooner, but now that I have, I love it. I also added the foundation for biomes. That means I picked and adjusted colors for both the land and the liquids on each world site. I think it's looking really cool so far. But do you have any biome ideas? Drop them in the comments. I might replace some that I don't like with your suggestions. On top of that, I implemented an inventory system, but it's limited to just one single slot. The game's concept involves creating things like bells or robots or something like that to transport resources from A to B. And the cool thing is that you can drop resources back onto any tile. Right now it's a feature, but I'm wondering if it takes away from the challenge. Maybe I'll limit placement to 1 to 2 tiles away from the player. We'll see how it feels. I also worked on a single biome, the ice biome. Like the grassland biome, it has trees and rocks, but they're covered in snow. I also added small ice crystals and snowmen, though for some reason they kinda look like they have duck beaks. On the left side you can now see a special side menu, which helps you to do some actions in the game. For example, this little icon here with the planet itself, it's the back button. Back to the world view, where I can now go to another side of the world, for example this one, and now I can head back. I also managed to fix this because before the mapping was wrong, so I clicked somewhere and got to the wrong side of the world. Now this is fixed. I also had the problem finding the player. For example, now, do you see the player? I do not, so therefore I got the center, the player. And this is pretty cool, so if you want to explore the world and get some resources, something like that, and now you do not find the player, you can just hit this little button here and the camera switches to the player. Pretty cool, right? The button in the middle is there to open the building menu, but this is, as you see right now, not implemented. But the plan is that you click this button and on the bottom side of the screen a new window pops up where you can craft or build some base buildings. I also fixed some behavior in regards of collecting some items, so if I want to collect the wood, it's okay, but now if I want to collect the stone, it doesn't work because the one single inventory slot is already full with wood, but now I can easily drop the wood anywhere, for example here, and now I can take the stone and hooray, this is working. But now if I want to pull a stone out of my inventory and want to put it on the wood, this does not work because one grid cell does only allow one item. So I also cannot put this on an environment object like a tree or a stone. And please don't have a look on these ugly objects. I plan to make them more beautiful like this stone. I also managed to refactor a shitload of code. I mean, come on. So I can reduce a bit of technical debt. I think the next steps are to implement the building system so you can collect resources and bring them from A to B. So to transport items from A to B, we need a funnel, which maybe is connected to a belt, which leads to a chest or something. But for that, let's just model a little funnel. It isn't the best voxel art I ever saw, but I think it fits the style of the game pretty well. So now I added a data class, so I can create endless amounts of new buildings. with a name, an ID, sprite, a prefab, and the building cost. I filled out everything for the funnel. Now let's just assign the prefab for the funnel to the data and test the build manager. Yeah, hooray, it's working. Nice. Yeah, this should not happen. But it's okay, I think, for now. Where are these funnels? God damn. I also added some conditions so that you cannot easily just click on anything, like for example this lake or on trees or stone or something like that. You just can build on places where everything is free, or, and this is important, you can build on places that are walkable. For example, this little grass tile. Bruh. So now it should work. Yes. Of course, you see the player is still wandering around, but this is just because I didn't add the condition to the movement. I also added an indicator, which basically indicates if you can place an object on a cell or if you cannot. For example, on this liquid, you cannot place this funnel, so it doesn't work. But on this grid here on the land, this does work. Super cool, now this is working. And I think the next step is to create some buildings and to check for the resources if something is available to build. First up, I fixed a really annoying issue with the building preview. Before, whenever you open the build menu and place the structure, the preview model would just stay there forever, even after closing the menu. It was like an unwanted guest that refused to leave. Please, please, I stay, I'll stay. But now it finally disappears properly when the build menu is closed. It's a small fix, but it definitely makes the game feel more polished. Or, well, at least it makes the game feel working and not be completely broken. Next, I tackled a pretty big issue, the player collision, with newly placed buildings. Before this fix, you could just casually walk through buildings like some kind of ghost. Not exactly ideal for an exploration game, but now the player actually recognizes the buildings as a solid object within its A-star pathfinding algorithm and moves around them instead of phasing through. It makes everything feel much more immersive and, actually functional. Now for the most exciting update, a brand new building. Introducing the Comprimator. Does the name even make sense? The name comes from a translation mistake, because I am, shocking news, not a native speaker, and in my language, to compress means komprimieren. So it's not the compressor, but the Comprimator, and I think that's beautiful. Yeah, this building acts as a storage unit where you can store an infinite amount of one item type. Super useful if you're hoarding materials and don't want your inventory, which still has only one slot, cluttered. To make it visually clear what's stored inside, I spent way too much time working on a cool hologram shader. I was really hyped about it, but guess what? Turns out the exported models from Magica Voxel don't support it. So yeah, hours of work completely wasted, super frustrating, but hey, that's gamedev for you. I'll figure out another way to display this stored item type in the future. And lastly, I made some UI adjustments. I rounded the corners and made the button slightly smaller. It gives the whole interface a much cleaner and more polished look. I might still tweak the colors a bit, but overall I really like how it turned out. I'm sure I'll keep making small changes as I test the game, just to make things feel as smooth and comfortable as possible. So the current state is that there's a tick manager. One tick is executed every 0.2 seconds. The funnel here executes every 10 ticks, so every 2 seconds, if there is an item in it. So let's drag and drop an item in there. And there you go. This little scale indicates that something is happening. Now we want to add some kind of conveyor belt, so we can connect this funnel with this comprimator. But there was one step that I had to do before I add the conveyor belt. I had to make sure that this funnel is kind of producer and this structure is a kind of consumer. So we have a producer and consumer relation here. The cool thing about that is that when I drag and drop an inventory item into our funnel, that the item is produced by the funnel and is directly consumed by this structure, or received if you want it that way. This is indicated by this little scale event. Cool, so now that this is working, the next step is to actually model our conveyor belt in Magica Voxel. I then reused the shader from my hologram shader fail, and it turned out to look quite good. And then my Unity broke by compiling some shaders.
Bruh.
And now I have working conveyor belts. So have a look. I have here 2 sticks of wood, and now I'm gonna drag and drop it in this funnel. And let's have a look if this is working. Hooray! This is working. Of course, the animation is not that great, but it is working, and I really love that this is working. It was much work. Let's see if we can make this more beautiful. Let's have a look. We have this poor astronaut that is fighting for his life to get some wood, and now with this hard work we have this one slot full of wood. But now if we restart the game, the whole inventory is empty because of course we do not have a way to save our game state. So in this devlog we're gonna tackle that, so let's dive right into it. At first I want to create some kind of static system, a save system which I can call from every class I have. And this is the base of it. So we have just a class for it. This is the save game state method, and in there we're gonna have this world save data, the player save data, the inventory save data, and so on and so forth. And yeah, let's start with adding some content to that. Okay, now let's have a look. We found 1 wood, and now let's just quit this game because I implemented some kind of automatic save when the game is quit. And if we open our save file now, you see, okay, we have the inventory save data with the item ID 0, which should be the wood, and the item amount is 1. So let's have a look if this is matching. Yeah, so as you see, the wood has the ID 0, and we have 1 wood in our inventory. So now let's restart the game and see if this was working. Yeah, you see on the bottom left corner we have 1 wood, and we can drag and drop this to every tile on this grid. Nice. But that was the easy part. Now comes the tricky part, the world. Because I procedurally generated this whole world, and now I have to find a way to save on what is water, what is a solid block, on which cell of this grid is an item, and what stats it has. So this should be not that kind of easy. But hey, let's tackle that.
2,000 years later.
It took some time, but finally I finished up the save system, and now I can start a brand new game. And you see, here is our world. On the grassland side there is a kind of lake here, 3 lakes here, 1 lake here, and you can see, okay, this is quite recognizable. So let's just quit this game and restart it again. And you should notice that the map stays the same. That's pretty cool, that's pretty neat. Also, you can see that the position is the same. Okay, we can move the player here around, and for example, you see this one lonely tree here, and we're gonna cut it down. And after that, we're gonna collect this wood. So we have 1 wood and no tree right here, and our player stays right at this lake here. So let's quit it again. It should be saved by now, and now we can restart the game again, and you see our player is still there. Our player is still by the lake, the tree is gone, and we have our wood item right here. Super cool. I managed to do that with a bunch of serializable classes where I have, for example, the inventory save data, as I mentioned earlier, the world save data and the player save data, and save all the important data to it. For example, here, the world save data is just a bunch of cells that is getting saved with all its cell data we have right here. And with this save system, we can finally implement some stuff that makes the game more playable, more content, more shiny objects, if you like it like that. Because now we have the foundation of a quite working game. We can save and load data, and now can finally focus on the fun things. Yeah, and that's it for this devlog. If you liked the video, then please hit the like button. If you have any suggestions regarding my game, then please comment down below. And if you don't want to miss any updates on this game, then subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, bye bye.